My name is Zuri, and I am 23 years old. When I was just 3 years old, my parents put me up for adoption and gave me away to the system for one simple reason. I was a girl. After 20 years of absolute silence, they finally contacted me, inviting me to a lavish family reunion at their estate. I foolishly thought they wanted to reconnect and heal the past. Instead, my biological father slammed a $50,000 loan document on my plate and demanded I fund my younger brother's luxury college lifestyle. When I refused, my father revealed a dark secret that he thought would destroy my financial future forever. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever had to defend yourself against toxic family members who only see you as a walking bank account. You will want to stay until the very end to hear exactly how I turned his cruel trap into the ultimate destruction of their fake elite empire. The afternoon sun was beating down heavily on the manicured lawns of the upscale Atlanta suburb. This was my biological family's territory. Everywhere I looked, there were signs of carefully curated wealth. Women in wide-brimmed Sunday hats fanned themselves while sipping sweet tea from crystal glasses. Men in tailored linen shirts stood around the massive outdoor grill, laughing loudly and smoking expensive cigars. The air was thick with the smell of roasted hickory wood barbecue smoke and the heavy perfume of people trying entirely too hard to look important. I sat quietly at a wrought iron patio table, taking in the scene. I had arrived 30 minutes ago, hoping for a quiet conversation with the people who had brought me into this world. Instead, I had been largely ignored, left to sit alone with a plate of macaroni and cheese and collard greens. Suddenly the crowd parted, and my biological father, Desmond, marched toward my table. He was 55 years old, carrying himself with the rigid, arrogant posture of a man who believed he owned every room he walked into. He wore a crisp white polo shirt and a gold watch that caught the sunlight. He did not offer a hug. He did not ask how my drive was. He did not even say hello. Desmond simply reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, pulled out a thick stack of stapled papers, and slammed it down directly onto my plate. The heavy document hit the porcelain with a loud clatter, splashing a drop of barbecue sauce onto the pristine white page. "Sign this right now, Zuri," Desmond commanded. His voice was not loud, but it carried a sharp, authoritative edge, meant to completely strip me of my agency. "Do not bother reading the fine print. Just put your name on the dotted line at the bottom of the third page." I looked down at the document, and then slowly looked up at the man who shared my DNA, but nothing else. "What exactly am I looking at, Desmond?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. "It is a loan guarantee," Desmond stated flatly, crossing his arms over his chest. "Jamal needs $50,000 in liquid capital immediately. He is launching a tech startup at his university, and the boy is a genius. He is the crown jewel of this family, and he is going to change the world. The bank requires a secondary guarantor with a clean credit history to release the funds. Since you did not cost us a single dime to raise for the last 20 years, you owe us this favor. Consider it your contribution to the family legacy." I stared at him, letting his ridiculous words hang in the hot, humid air. He was entirely serious. He had invited the daughter he threw away 2 decades ago to a Sunday cookout just to use her as a financial human shield for his golden child. I looked across the yard and spotted my 20-year-old biological brother, Jamal. He was wearing designer sunglasses and holding a red plastic cup, laughing obnoxiously while playing cornhole with his fraternity brothers. He did not look like a tech genius on the verge of changing the world. He looked like an entitled college boy who had never been told no in his entire life. I picked up a crisp white napkin and delicately wiped a speck of sauce from my fingers. "I am not signing anything, Desmond," I said, my tone remaining icy and completely unbothered. "I am 23 years old. I have not seen you since I was a toddler. You do not get to summon me here to finance the life of a boy you actually chose to keep. You can take this paper back to the bank and figure it out yourself." Desmond leaned forward, planting both hands on the table. The veins in his neck began to bulge. "You listen to me, you arrogant little girl," he hissed. You are blood. You are a part of this family whether you like it or not. Jamal is your brother. He is carrying the weight of our name, and you will support him. I am not your daughter, Desmond, I replied softly, taking a slow sip of my iced tea. You made sure of that 20 years ago. Now take this garbage off my plate before it ruins my appetite completely. Before Desmond could explode, my biological mother Vivian suddenly appeared at his side. Vivian was 50 years old, but spent a fortune trying to look 30. She wore a bright yellow silk sundress and heavy gold jewelry that clinked as she moved. She placed a manicured hand on Desmond's chest, acting as the voice of reason, while her eyes glared at me with absolute contempt. Desmond, let me handle this, Vivian said, her voice dripping with fake southern sweetness. She turned her sharp gaze to me. Zuri, you are acting incredibly ungrateful right now. You should be thanking the Lord above that we even reached out to invite you to this beautiful home. Giving you up for adoption when you were 3 years old was the greatest blessing we could have given you. A blessing, I repeated, raising an eyebrow at her twisted logic. Yes, a blessing, Vivian insisted loudly, ensuring that the aunties and church friends standing nearby could hear her performance. Our family belongs to the Black elite Zuri. We have a legacy to uphold in this community. We needed a strong male heir to inherit the family investment fund and carry our name through Morehouse College. A useless girl was simply a financial drain we could not afford at the time. We made the difficult choice to let you go so we could focus all our resources on Jamal. And look at him now. He is brilliant. He is flawless. Now that you are an adult, it is time for you to understand your place and repay the gift of life we gave you. I was actually speechless for a brief second. The sheer magnitude of her delusion was fascinating. She genuinely believed that throwing me into the foster care system was a noble sacrifice for the sake of an imaginary royal bloodline. As I prepared to respond, a new voice joined the conversation. It was high-pitched, whiny, and incredibly condescending. Honestly, Mrs. Vivian, I do not know why you are even wasting your breath explaining things to her. I turned my head to see Chloe stepping up beside Jamal, who had finally wandered over from his lawn game. Chloe was 20 years old, blonde and white. She was Jamal's fiancée and the daughter of a prominent corporate lawyer. She carried herself with the kind of reckless confidence that only comes from generational wealth and a profound lack of self-awareness. Chloe looked me up and down, her lip curling in disgust as she took in my simple tailored linen dress and bare face. I mean, just look at her, Chloe scoffed, taking a sip from her mimosa. She is wearing some cheap ghetto thrift store outfit to a formal Sunday dinner. Jamal is brilliant. He is a visionary. His startup is going to make millions. It is honestly pathetic that his massive potential is being stalled by some bitter blue-collar outcast who cannot even afford a decent handbag. You should be honored to sign that paper, Zuri. It is probably the only time your name will ever be attached to something important. The casual racism masked as classism was so thick I could practically cut it with a knife. Chloe stood there smirking, feeling entirely protected by the wealthy black family that had embraced her as a status symbol. Jamal wrapped an arm around Chloe's waist, nodding in agreement with his fiancée's insults. Listen to her, Zuri, Jamal said, flashing a perfectly bright, arrogant smile. Chloe knows what she is talking about. Her dad is a huge lawyer down in Miami. We are building an empire here. Do not be a hater just because you grew up poor and alone. Sign the paper so we can get back to the party. You are bringing down the vibe. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell. I simply picked up my glass of iced tea, feeling the cold condensation against my palm, and took a long, refreshing sip. The entire table was watching me, expecting me to break down in tears or fly into a rage. I smiled instead. Chloe. I began, my voice ringing clear and crisp across the quiet patio. Before you attempt to lecture me about wealth, you might want to look a little closer at your own life. You claim my outfit is ghetto thrift, but I can see the mismatched stitching on the handle of your supposedly designer bag from 3 feet away. It is a terrible counterfeit. Chloe's face instantly turned bright red and she instinctively pulled her handbag behind her back. And as for your brilliant visionary of a fiancé, I continued, shifting my gaze to Jamal. I noticed his bloodshot eyes and the slight tremor in his hands. Tech geniuses do not usually reek of cheap tequila and stale weed on a Sunday afternoon. He looks more like a frat boy who has been awake for 3 days straight than a CEO. If his startup is going to make millions, why is he begging a blue-collar outcast for $50,000 in cash? A collective gasp rippled through the nearby guests. The pastor, who had been hovering near the dessert table, suddenly found his shoes very interesting. Several aunts exchanged wide-eyed glances, whispering behind their hands. I had hit a nerve, and I had hit it hard. Vivian's face contorted with absolute fury. She slammed her hand down on the table, causing the silverware to rattle. How dare you speak to my future daughter-in-law? That way, Vivian screamed, her carefully crafted, elegant persona shattering into a million pieces. She turned to the crowd, waving her arms frantically. Look at her, everyone. Look at this ungrateful stray. We welcome her into our beautiful home, and she repays us by insulting a young black man's bright future. She is trying to ruin my son because she is jealous and broken. The crowd immediately rallied behind the matriarch. Voices rose from the lawn condemning me. She has no respect, an older aunt shouted from the porch. Jamal is the future of this family. Another cousin chimed in, glaring at me. You need to know your place and support your brother. Jamal laughed mockingly, pointing a finger at me. You hear that, Zuri? Nobody here wants you. Nobody here cares about your little attitude. You are just a signature on a piece of paper to us. Now stop throwing a tantrum and sign the damn document before I smash that cheap glass in your face. Jamal took a threatening step forward, but I did not even blink. I sat perfectly still, maintaining my composure while chaos erupted around me. I knew exactly who I was, and I knew exactly what I was capable of. I was the chief executive officer of a massive financial technology conglomerate. I handled hostile takeovers and aggressive boardroom negotiations before breakfast. A backyard full of delusional snobs was child's play to me. I picked up my purse and prepared to leave. There was no reasoning with people who were entirely committed to their own toxicity. I had seen enough, and I was ready to return to my real life. But as I pushed my chair back, Desmond stepped directly into my path, blocking my exit. Desmond leaned in close, bringing the heavy scent of expensive bourbon and desperate malice right into my personal space. His eyes were dark and calculating, completely devoid of any paternal warmth. He smiled, and it was the most chilling expression I had ever seen. You really think you can just walk away from me? Desmond whispered, his voice low enough that only I could hear the venom in his words. You think you can just say no and go back to your sad little life? You are a fool, Zuri. I did not need you to sign this paper willingly. I just wanted to see if you could follow simple instructions. I stopped moving, my eyes locking onto his. What are you talking about, Desmond? I asked, demanding an answer. Desmond chuckled, a dry grating sound deep in his chest. When we got rid of you 20 years ago, I made sure to keep a certified copy of your original birth certificate. I have your social security number, Zuri. I have everything I need to establish your identity. You see, I did not just ask the bank for a loan. I went to a high-risk private credit lender. They do not ask too many questions as long as the paperwork looks legitimate. My heart skipped a single beat as his words processed in my mind. I already forged your signature, Desmond confessed, a triumphant sneer spreading across his face. I used your name, your social security number, and that trashy old apartment address in Baltimore I found in the public records. The ink has been dry for 3 days. You are legally bound to this contract right now. The only reason I brought you here today was to give you an ultimatum. Desmond tapped the stack of papers on the table with a heavy thud. You are going to wire $50,000 in cash directly to Jamal's checking account by midnight tonight. If you transfer the cash, I will tear up this forged contract and let you walk away. But if you refuse, the private lender will trigger the loan tomorrow morning. They will come after you for the full amount plus the astronomical interest rates. They will garnish your wages, ruin your credit score, and destroy any chance you have at a normal financial future. You will carry this debt for the rest of your miserable life. I stood completely still, trapped in the shadow of his massive ego. He honestly believed he had checkmated me. He honestly believed he had cornered a helpless young woman and forced her into financial ruin to save his precious son. Desmond stood back, crossing his arms and waiting for me to collapse into a panic. Vivian and Chloe watched with cruel, identical smirks, enjoying my silence. I looked down at the forged document resting next to my untouched plate of food. I stared at the logo of the private credit lender printed at the very top of the page. I read the fine print. I looked at the fake signature Desmond had carefully crafted at the bottom. And then I felt a slow, cold smile spread across my own face. Desmond had no idea what he had just done. He had no idea who he was actually dealing with. He thought he had trapped a mouse, but he had just locked himself in a cage with a lion. I looked down at the heavy stack of papers resting next to my plate. I studied the ink. I studied the lie. I studied the sheer arrogance of the forgery. My eyes scanned the printed text until they landed on the address listed right beneath my supposedly signed name. It was a unit number in a rundown apartment complex in Baltimore. It was an address from 3 years ago. 3 years before I wrote my first line of code. 3 years before I secured my first round of venture capital. 3 years before I became entirely untouchable. They had no idea who I was. They had no idea what I had built. They had no idea they were holding a match to a powder keg. Desmond stood over me with his chest puffed out fully, believing he had secured a flawless victory. Jamal took another long drink from his plastic cup, snickering at my silence. Chloe crossed her arms, looking thoroughly entertained by the prospect of my financial ruin. Then the heavy sound of footsteps approached from across the patio. It was Pastor Thomas, the spiritual and moral authority of their elite social circle. He was an imposing man in a tailored seersucker suit carrying a plate of barbecue and a warm smile. The moment Vivian saw the pastor approaching, her entire demeanor fractured and reformed. The cold venom in her eyes vanished. The rigid tension in her shoulders dissolved. She transformed. She transformed into a victim. She transformed into a martyr. She transformed into a heartbroken mother desperately trying to save her fractured family. Vivian let out a loud theatrical gasp that instantly caught the attention of everyone within earshot. She swayed on her feet, clutching her chest as if struck by a physical blow. She buried her face in her hands and began to weep. Pastor Thomas hurried over, setting his plate down and rushing to support her. "Vivian, what is wrong?" he asked, his voice thick with pastoral concern. Vivian collapsed against his arm, letting out a broken wail that echoed across the manicured lawn. "We tried, Pastor Thomas." She cried, her voice trembling with perfect, calculated sorrow. "We reached out to her. We reached out with open arms. We reached out with nothing but love. We just wanted to heal our family." Pastor Thomas looked from the weeping woman to me, his expression shifting from concern to deep disappointment. "She is trying to extort us," Pastor Vivian sobbed, gripping his suit jacket. "She is trying to ruin us. We invited her into our home to share our blessings. We wanted to give her a chance to know her brother. And she demands $50,000 in cash. She says she will ruin Jamal's startup company if we do not pay her." I sat perfectly still. I watched the tears stream down Vivian's perfectly powdered cheeks. I watched the pastor shake his head in disgust. I watched the surrounding guests murmur in collective outrage. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Vivian was painting me as a greedy predator and portraying her own family as the innocent prey. "We gave her life!" Vivian wailed loudly, ensuring the entire party was hanging on her every word. "We gave her life, and this is how she repays us. She comes into my home. She comes into my sanctuary. She comes into our lives just to drain us dry. I am so heartbroken. I am so devastated. I am so terrified of my own daughter." Desmond immediately stepped in to play the role of the stoic, protective husband. He wrapped his thick arm around Vivian's shaking shoulders, pulling her close. He looked at the pastor with a weary, practiced sigh. "We did our best," Pastor Desmond said, smoothing his hand over Vivian's hair. "We hoped time would heal her wounds. But she is damaged. She is bitter. She is full of hatred. We cannot reason with her. She just wants to tear down everything Jamal has worked so hard to build." Pastor Thomas looked down at me. He used his most patronizing pastoral tone, projecting his voice so the gathered aunties and uncles could hear his righteous judgment. Young lady, the pastor began, his face a mask of pity and scorn. Forgiveness is the only path to salvation. These people gave you the gift of life. Demanding money from the very people who brought you into this world is a grave sin. You are letting greed poison your soul. You should be asking this family for forgiveness, not demanding their hard-earned money. I let them talk. I let them spin their web of lies. I let them dig their own grave deeper and deeper with every false tear and every self-righteous word. I felt the familiar weight of their rejection pressing down on my shoulders. It was the same weight I had carried as a child, wondering why I was never enough. It was the same weight I had carried as a teenager, wondering why I had been discarded. But this time the weight did not crush me. This time the weight fueled me. "You are breaking your mother's heart," the pastor reprimanded, pointing a stern finger at me. "Look at what you are doing to her. She is in agony over your actions." Vivian let out another dramatic sob, burying her face in Desmond's shirt. The crowd of relatives closed in tighter, forming a wall of judgment and hostility around the patio table. They clucked their tongues, they shook their heads, they whispered cruel insults disguised as prayers. I slowly reached out and picked up the forged loan document. I folded it neatly, exactly in half. Then I folded it again. I placed the folded paper inside my designer tote bag next to my wallet. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself against the pastor's ridiculous accusations. I simply looked at Vivian, who was peeking out from behind Desmond's shoulder to gauge the success of her performance. I smiled. It was a small, terrifying smile that made Vivian's fake tears suddenly stop. "Are you quite finished?" I asked, my voice cutting through the thick, humid air like a blade of ice. "Because if the theatrical portion of this afternoon is over, I have a few facts I would like to share with the congregation." Vivian stiffened, stepping away from Desmond. The pastor frowned clearly, taken aback by my complete lack of remorse. Jamal scoffed loudly from the sidelines, but I ignored him entirely. I kept my eyes locked on Vivian, refusing to look away, refusing to be intimidated, refusing to be the victim they so desperately wanted me to be. "Extortion is a very strong word, Vivian," I said, leaning back in my wrought iron chair. "Extortion implies I want something you possess. Extortion implies I need your money. But the truth is much more interesting. The truth is you do not have anything I want. You do not have anything I need. And you certainly do not have $50,000. Jamal slammed his hands on the patio table, making the silverware jump. His frat boy charm had completely evaporated, leaving behind the panicked sweat of a cornered animal. He reached blindly across the table, trying to grab my designer tote bag where I had just tucked the forged contract. He was breathing heavily, his eyes darting frantically toward Chloe, and then back to me. "Shut your mouth," he hissed, his voice cracking. "You do not know anything about my money. You are just trying to embarrass me in front of my fiancé." Before his shaking fingers could even graze the leather handle of my bag, a thick hand clamped down on his shoulder. It was Uncle Ray. He pulled Jamal backward with surprising force, shielding the boy behind his broad frame. Uncle Ray was a man who made his living moving money around in the shadows for the city's wealthy elite. He wore a custom-tailored suit even at a backyard barbecue and smelled of expensive cigars and moral bankruptcy. "Easy, son," Uncle Ray murmured, patting Jamal on the chest as if comforting a frightened child. "Do not let her rile you up. Let the adults handle this." Within seconds, the rest of the extended family descended upon my table, forming a literal human wall around their precious golden child. Aunt Shirley marched to the front, her massive church hat casting a dark shadow over my plate. Aunt Beatrice flanked her on the right, crossing her arms so tightly her diamond bracelets dug into her skin. Several other cousins and uncles crowded behind them, their faces twisted into identical masks of self-righteous anger. They had formed a protective barricade to shield a grown man from facing the consequences of his own actions. "You really think you are doing something clever here, Zuri?" Uncle Ray began, his voice dropping into a low, patronizing register. "You think you can march into this house and throw around accusations about $50,000 like it actually matters? We all know Desmond signed that paper. We know exactly what he did to secure that loan." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely amused by his brazen confession. So the family accountant is openly admitting to endorsing federal fraud, I asked, keeping my tone light and conversational. That is a bold strategy, Uncle Ray. It is called protecting the family investment. Uncle Ray shot back, leaning over the table. You do not understand how real wealth works because you have never had any. Desmond did what was necessary to secure capital for Jamal. $50,000 is a drop in the bucket compared to the returns Jamal is going to bring into this family. Sometimes you have to bend the rules to build an empire. You should be glad your name is finally being used for something productive instead of just taking up space on a birth certificate. Aunt Shirley nodded vigorously in agreement, the silk flower on her hat bobbing up and down. You listen to your uncle, she commanded, pointing a manicured finger at me. Jamal is the crown jewel of this entire bloodline. He is a young, gifted black man who is building a revolutionary tech company. The world is already hard enough on him. We are not going to sit here and let you destroy his trajectory over a measly sum of money. I looked past Aunt Shirley's pointing finger and locked eyes with Jamal. He was hiding behind his aunt, staring at the ground, avoiding my gaze entirely. He looked incredibly pathetic. A measly sum of money, I repeated, taking a slow sip of my iced tea. If it is such a small amount of money, Shirley, why do not you pay it? Why do not you drain your savings account to cover his fraudulent loan? Aunt Shirley scoffed as if the very idea was deeply offensive. Because it is your duty, she snapped. You were given away so this family could focus its resources on him. Your only purpose right now is to facilitate his success. Look at Chloe. Aunt Shirley gestured dramatically toward Chloe, who was standing a few feet away looking terribly inconvenienced by the shouting. The entire group of relatives practically swooned just looking at the girl. Do you have any idea who Chloe's father is? Aunt Shirley demanded, her voice trembling with intense social climbing desperation. Her family represents generational power. They represent the kind of elite legal dynasty that we have spent decades trying to align ourselves with. When Jamal marries that girl, he elevates this entire family. He secures our legacy in high society. He gives us access to boardrooms and country clubs we could never breach on our own. You are going to ruin a multi-million-dollar union because you are too selfish to take a tiny hit to your credit score. Aunt Beatrice chimed in, her tone dripping with toxic, fake empathy. We know you are hurt, Zuri. We know you feel left out, but you have to look at the bigger picture. You have no husband. You have no high society connections. You are a blue-collar worker with no real future. Jamal is a visionary. He is marrying into a white legal dynasty that will protect him forever. You taking on this debt ensures that his background check remains spotless for his future father-in-law. You should be honored that God gave you a chance to serve your brother's higher purpose. I sat back in my chair, letting their words wash over me. The sheer magnitude of their delusion was almost beautiful in its toxicity. They had built an entire religion around worshiping Jamal. They had convinced themselves that committing a felony, destroying my financial future, and sacrificing my life were noble Christian acts as long as it kept their golden child on his fake pedestal. They were willing to bow down to a racist 20-year-old girl just for a taste of her father's corporate power. So let me make sure I understand the terms of this family reunion, I said, my voice carrying clearly over their collective heavy breathing. You want me to assume $50,000 of high-interest debt. You want me to ruin my credit and face potential legal ruin. You want me to take the fall for a forged document. And you want me to do all of this so Jamal can pretend to be a tech mogul and marry a girl who openly mocked me as a ghetto thrift store outcast not even 10 minutes ago. Yes, Aunt Shirley stated, her chin held high without a single ounce of shame or hesitation. That is exactly what you are going to do because it is the right thing to do for the family. Uncle Ray pulled out a sleek silver pen from his breast pocket and tossed it onto the table. It landed right next to the spot where Desmond had slammed the contract earlier. The private lender is not going to care about your little feelings, Zuri, Uncle Ray said, crossing his arms. Desmond locked the trap. The money has to be transferred by midnight or the loan triggers under your name. Stop making a scene. Stop crying about fairness. Pick up the pen, transfer the cash from whatever little savings account you have, and walk away. If you do this quietly, we might even invite you to the wedding. I looked at the silver pen resting on the glass table. I looked at the wall of relatives sneering down at me. I looked at Jamal hiding behind them clutching his red cup. And then I looked at Chloe, who was tapping her foot impatiently, clearly waiting for the blue-collar outcast to submit to her wealthy superiors. They thought they had broken me. They thought their combined social weight and aggressive gaslighting would force me to break down in tears and surrender. They had absolutely no idea that I owned the very institution they were trying to use as a weapon. The heavy silence stretched across the patio as every eye remained glued to my hand. I let my fingers hover just inches above the polished glass surface of the table. Desmond exhaled a sharp breath of victory, leaning back on his heels. Aunt Shirley adjusted her massive hat, her lips curling into a satisfied smirk. They all thought I was broken. They all thought the sheer weight of their collective intimidation had finally crushed the fight out of me. I let my hand drop, but I did not reach for the silver pen Uncle Ray had tossed in front of me. I slid my hand right past the shiny metal instrument and wrapped my fingers around my smartphone. I picked it up and held it firmly in my grip. I allowed my shoulders to slump just a fraction, feeding them the exact visual cue of a cornered victim that they so desperately craved. If you think I am going to let you steal my future to cover up for his failures, you are out of your minds, I said, letting a perfectly calculated tremor enter my voice. I unlocked the screen with my thumb. Identity theft and forging a signature on a $50,000 loan are federal crimes, Desmond. I am dialing the police right now, and I am going to stand right here in this yard while I wait for the squad cars to arrive. The triumphant smiles vanished from their faces in an instant. The smug satisfaction melted into immediate chaotic panic. Aunt Shirley let out a high-pitched shriek, pressing a hand to her chest. Desmond lunged forward, but he was not fast enough. It was Jamal who completely lost his mind. The charming, perfectly groomed pre-med student facade evaporated in a split second. Jamal let out a guttural sound of pure rage and threw his red plastic cup onto the grass. He closed the distance between us in 2 violent strides. Before my thumb could even press the first digit on the keypad, Jamal grabbed my wrist with a bruising, crushing grip. His fingers dug into my skin with the desperate strength of a coward who was watching his entire fabricated life slip through his fingers. "Give me that phone, you stupid bitch!" he screamed, his voice cracking with panic. He violently twisted my arm, wrenching the device out of my hand. He threw it down onto the hard stone patio with blinding force. The sickening crunch of the impact echoed sharply against the quiet hum of the suburban neighborhood. But throwing it was not enough for him. Jamal raised his foot and stomped his heavy, expensive leather loafer directly onto the device. The glass screen shattered into 1,000 tiny glittering fragments, grinding against the pavement until the phone was nothing more than a bent, useless piece of metal and plastic. The entire yard went completely still. The pastor took a step back, his eyes wide with shock at the sudden burst of violence. Vivian, my supposed mother, did not even flinch. She just stood there watching her golden child physically assault a woman and destroy her property without offering a single word of reprimand. Chloe actually smiled, a nasty, satisfied little grin crossing her face as she watched my phone get ground into the dirt. Jamal kicked the broken pieces aside and stepped right into my personal space. He loomed over me, his chest heaving, his breath smelling like stale liquor and unchecked privilege. His eyes were wild-wide and bloodshot, devoid of any rational thought. "Call the cops." He taunted, his voice dripping with venomous mockery. "Go ahead, Zuri. Yell for help. Scream for the police. Who exactly do you think they are going to believe when they pull up to this estate?" He leaned down, placing both of his hands on the arms of my patio chair, caging me in. He was trying to use his physical size to intimidate me, entirely unaware that I had faced down corporate predators 10 times his size without breaking a sweat. "Take a good look around you," Jamal whispered harshly. "Look at this house. Look at the cars in the driveway. Look at the people standing behind me. I am a top-tier pre-med student at one of the most prestigious universities in the country. I have a spotless record. I am engaged to the daughter of a major corporate lawyer. I have pillars of the community ready to testify to my outstanding character. And what are you? He scoffed, a wet, ugly sound of pure disgust. You are an abandoned nobody. You are a blue-collar outcast who showed up to our family cookout causing a scene and making wild accusations. If the cops show up here, my father will tell them you became mentally unstable and started throwing a tantrum because we refused to give you a handout. Chloe will tell them you threatened us. The pastor will pray for your troubled soul right in front of the officers. They will probably arrest you for trespassing and psychiatric evaluation before they even ask for my statement. I kept my back pressed firmly against the wrought iron chair, staring up at his sweating red face. I allowed my eyes to widen slightly, feeding his massive, fragile ego. You do not hold any cards here, Zuri. Jamal continued, his voice rising as his confidence returned. You are playing a game you cannot win. You think you are so smart, but you are just a stray dog we led into the yard for the afternoon. You are not leaving this property. My father locked the front gate, and nobody is opening it until I get an alert on my phone saying your money has cleared into my account. You are going to sit in that chair, pick up that silver pen, and initiate the wire transfer. And if you try to pull another stunt like that, I will make sure you leave here with a lot more than a broken phone. The threat of physical violence hung heavy and undeniable in the air. The family circled closer, tightening the barricade around the table. Uncle Ray crossed his arms, looking at me with cold calculation. Vivian turned her head away, entirely washing her hands of the situation. They had successfully cornered the prey. They had cut off my communication, isolated me from the outside world, and locked the gates. To anyone watching, I was a defenseless young woman completely trapped by a family of ruthless predators willing to destroy my life to protect their own. I looked down at the shattered remains of my cell phone scattered across the patio stones and took a slow, deliberate breath. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not flinch or cower or give them the satisfaction of a single shed tear. I simply looked down at the ruined metal and crushed glass at my feet, and then slowly raised my eyes to meet my brother's flushed, sweating face. He was panting heavily, vibrating with the adrenaline of his own violent outburst. He truly believed he had won. He truly believed that by breaking a piece of technology, he had broken my spirit. I calmly reached my hand into my designer tote bag. The movement was slow, deliberate, and completely devoid of the frantic panic they were all waiting to see. Jamal took a slight step backward, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing his features, as my hand emerged holding a sleek silver iPad. Fine, I said, my voice eerily calm against the backdrop of their heavy breathing. I will log into your account right now. The shift in the atmosphere of the yard was instantaneous. The collective sigh of relief from the surrounding relatives was so loud it could have rustled the leaves in the oak trees. The tension dissolved, replaced immediately by the smug, suffocating arrogance of a family who believed they had successfully bullied the outcast into submission. Uncle Ray clapped Jamal hard on the shoulder, a wide, predatory grin spreading across his face. There you go, he boomed, his voice full of false joviality. That is what family does. We push through the hard moments to get to the blessing. You are making the smart choice, Zuri. Aunt Shirley adjusted her massive hat, looking down her nose at me with supreme satisfaction. It is about time you showed some respect, young lady, she declared, crossing her arms over her chest. The Lord works in mysterious ways to bring the stubborn to heel. You will thank us for this intervention one day. Even Vivian stepped forward, her fake tears drying up instantly as she reverted to her role as the gracious matriarch. You are doing the right thing, Zuri, Vivian said, smoothing the front of her dress. We will forget all about this ugly little tantrum once the wire clears. We can put this behind us and enjoy the barbecue like a real family. Chloe just rolled her eyes, checking her perfect manicure with a heavy sigh. Honestly, all this ghetto drama for 50 grand? She muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. Let us just get this over with so Jamal and I can leave. I ignored them all. I tapped the glowing screen, unlocking the device with my fingerprint. I pulled up the secure financial terminal I used to monitor the high-risk accounts my fintech firm routinely flagged for our banking partners. My fingers flew across the digital keyboard, pulling up the specific routing and account numbers listed on the forged loan document. Jamal leaned closer, his eyes hungry and desperate, waiting to see the confirmation screen of his financial salvation. He practically salivated at the sight of the banking portal. I stopped typing. I looked at the screen, letting a small, perfectly manufactured frown crease my forehead. I turned the iPad around, holding the glowing display directly in front of Jamal's face. "That is strange, Jamal," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sudden expectant silence of the patio. "Why is the corporate account for your tech startup frozen by federal authorities for illegal sports betting?" The blood drained from Jamal's face so fast he looked like a corpse. His jaw dropped, his mouth opening and closing repeatedly without producing a single sound. His frat boy bravado, his unearned arrogance, his entire golden child persona evaporated into thin air. He stared wide-eyed at the harsh red warning banner flashing across the top of the iPad screen. "Illegal sports betting," Uncle Ray barked, snatching the iPad directly from my hands. Uncle Ray was a man who moved money for a living. He spent his entire career hiding assets and dodging taxes for the wealthy. He knew exactly what a federal financial freeze looked like. His eyes darted rapidly across the raw financial data on the screen, and the remaining color vanished from his face too. His thick hands began to tremble. "Jamal," Uncle Ray whispered, his voice stripped of all its former booming authority. "Jamal, what is this? These are federal holds. The Securities and Exchange Commission and the FBI have flagged this routing number for money laundering and illegal offshore gambling syndicates." "No," Jamal stammered, taking another step backward and holding his hands up as if surrendering to an invisible police force. "No, that is a mistake. That has to be a mistake. Zuri hacked it. She fabricated this to frame me." "I do not need to fabricate federal indictments, Jamal," I replied, standing up slowly from the wrought iron chair. The physical intimidation was over. I was the one towering over them now. The wall of relatives that had formed to protect him suddenly felt very fragile. "I run a financial technology empire," I explained, pacing slowly around the edge of the table. "My software tracks fraudulent money movement for the largest banking institutions in this country. When Desmond tried to use my social security number to secure your little loan earlier this week, the private lender ran it through an automated risk assessment protocol. My company built that assessment algorithm." The realization hit the extended family like a freight train. Aunt Shirley's jaw went slack. Vivian clutched Desmond's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his suit jacket. "I received a security alert about a forged signature 3 days ago." I continued, keeping my eyes locked on my trembling brother. "But when I looked into exactly where the loan money was supposed to be routed, I found this. Your genius brother is not building a medical technology company. He does not have a startup. It is a shell company. He has been taking venture capital from his frat brother's personal loans in our father's name and funneling every single cent straight into illegal offshore sportsbooks." Jamal fell to his knees on the patio stones, landing right next to the shattered remains of my phone. He buried his face in his hands, letting out a pathetic, whimpering sound. "He is not trying to secure capital for a business," I announced to the horrified crowd. "He is hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to an underground gambling syndicate. And he needed my $50,000 because he owes money to the kind of people who do not send polite collection letters. They send enforcers to break your legs." Chloe pushed her way through the circle of frozen relatives, her face contorted with a mixture of rage and sheer terror. Her voice was sharp and trembling as she stared down at the man she was supposed to marry. "Jamal," Chloe demanded, grabbing his shoulder and shaking him violently. "Tell me she is lying. Tell me my father did not just wire $200,000 of our family's money into a gambling syndicate yesterday morning." Jamal could not even look at her. He just kept his face buried in his hands, sobbing into the concrete. The crown jewel of the family, the visionary tech founder, the golden child who was supposed to elevate their entire bloodline, was nothing but a degenerate gambler who had just stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from a powerful legal dynasty. And the federal government was already watching every single move he made. But keeping this information confined to a 10-inch tablet was not going to be enough. My family had spent my entire life loudly broadcasting my supposed failures to anyone who would listen. They had humiliated me in front of cousins, neighbors, and strangers. It was only fitting that Jamal received the exact same public treatment. I tapped 3 buttons on my iPad, executing a forced override on the local network. Desmond had set up a massive 85-inch flat-screen television on the far side of the patio, specifically to watch the college football playoffs during his extravagant cookout. He had bragged all afternoon about the expensive wireless surround sound system connected to it. The live sports broadcast abruptly cut to black. A loud electronic hum vibrated through the high-end speakers, causing several guests to spill their drinks. Then the massive screen flared back to life, illuminating the entire backyard with the crisp blue and white interface of my fintech software. My company logo sat proudly in the top right corner. Plastered across the center of the 85-inch display was Jamal's name, followed by a comprehensive real-time breakdown of his deeply hidden financial ruin. Since we are having a family meeting about transparency, I think everyone should get a clear view of the crown jewel's actual portfolio. I announced, my voice amplified by the sheer silence of the stunned crowd. Desmond lunged toward the television, frantically mashing the buttons on the side of the display, trying to power it down. He ripped the power cord from the outdoor socket, but the screen did not die. I had connected the display to his backup generator specifically for this moment. Desmond backed away, his face slick with a cold sweat, as the damning numbers glowed brightly against the evening sky. "Let us look at this revolutionary tech startup Aunt Shirley was just praising," I said, pacing slowly in front of the screen, acting as the narrator of my brother's total destruction. I swiped my finger across the iPad. The display on the massive television zoomed in on a specific ledger of incoming deposits. Notice the source of the capital, I instructed, pointing a manicured finger at the glowing screen. These are not venture capital funds. These are not angel investors. These deposits come directly from the accounts of Jamal's prestigious university fraternity. As the chapter treasurer, he had unfettered access to their operating budget, their alumni donation fund, and their national dues. He has been systematically siphoning tens of thousands of dollars a month into a shell account. He has been embezzling from the sons of senators and judges. A collective gasp ripped through the crowd. Uncle Ray staggered backward, gripping the back of a patio chair as if his legs could no longer support his weight. He knew exactly what kind of prison time came with wire fraud and embezzlement on that scale. Vivian shook her head wildly, covering her ears as if that could block out the visual evidence glowing right in front of her. "No," she whispered frantically. "No, he is building a company. He told me he was building a medical software company." I swiped my screen again. The television display shifted from the stolen frat funds to a terrifying list of outgoing wire transfers. "He is not building a company, Vivian," I stated, my voice entirely void of pity. "He is fueling a massive out-of-control gambling addiction. Look at the outgoing wires. They are not going to software developers or patent lawyers. They are going to offshore betting syndicates in Costa Rica and private bookies in Atlantic City. He lost $15,000 betting on a single basketball game last Tuesday. He lost another $20,000 on a horse race over the weekend. The money he stole from his frat brothers is completely gone." Jamal remained curled on the patio stones, sobbing uncontrollably. He was not crying out of remorse. He was crying because he was finally caught. The golden boy facade had been completely ripped away, leaving behind a pathetic, terrified criminal. "But wait," I said, pausing for dramatic effect and turning my attention directly to Chloe. "The gambling losses are only half the story. A man of Jamal's high social standing has to maintain a certain aesthetic right. He has to impress a girl from a powerful legal dynasty. He has to make sure she thinks she is marrying an equal." Chloe had gone completely rigid. Her arms were wrapped tightly around her waist, and her perfectly contoured face was frozen in a mask of absolute horror. She was staring at the television screen as if it were a monster about to devour her alive. I tapped the iPad one final time. A new spreadsheet populated the screen. This one was heavily detailed with credit card receipts, shipping manifests, and tracking numbers. "Let us look at those beautiful designer gifts Jamal has been showering you with, Chloe." I said, taking a few steps closer to her. The Birkin bag he bought you for your anniversary. The red-bottom shoes you wore to the country club last month. The diamond tennis bracelet you bragged about on social media just yesterday. I highlighted a specific row of transactions on the screen. The entire party watched as the truth was laid bare. Jamal did not buy those at a boutique in Paris or a high-end jeweler in Manhattan, I explained thoroughly, enjoying the way Chloe's eyes widened in sheer panic. He bought them from a counterfeit distributor based out of a warehouse in Guangzhou. Every single piece of luxury designer gear you are wearing right now, Chloe, is completely fake. Your entire lifestyle is built on Canal Street knockoffs funded by money he stole from his fraternity brothers. The absolute silence in the backyard was deafening. The aunts and uncles who had just spent the last hour worshipping Chloe and elevating her above me were now staring at her like she was a walking joke. The powerful rich girl aesthetic had been entirely dismantled in less than 60 seconds. Chloe looked down at the expensive leather handbag clutched in her hand. Her breathing became shallow and rapid. The realization that she had been parading around her elite social circles, flaunting cheap counterfeits, hit her with the force of a physical blow. "You lied to me!" Chloe shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical screech. "You told me you bought this in Milan. You told my father you were a founder. You are just a broke thief." She threw the counterfeit bag directly at Jamal's head. The heavy metal clasp struck him squarely in the cheek, leaving a bright red welt. Jamal scrambled backward, raising his arms to shield his face from his enraged fiancée. "Chloe, baby, please." Jamal begged, his voice cracking pathetically. "I can fix this. I just need a little more time. I will win it back. I have a sure thing on the game tonight. I swear I can double the money and put it all back before the frat audit." "You are going to federal prison!" Chloe screamed, tears of utter humiliation streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "My father is going to make sure they lock you under the jail. I am done with you. I am done with all of you. You are nothing but common criminals." She spun around and stormed across the lawn, shoving Aunt Shirley out of her way. The heavy iron gate slammed shut behind her, echoing like a gunshot through the silent yard. The wedding was off. The powerful connection to the legal dynasty was severed. The generational wealth they had all been banking on had just walked out the door and taken their social status with it. I stood quietly in the center of the patio, holding my iPad. I looked at Desmond, who was staring blankly at the dark television screen. I looked at Vivian, who was sliding down the side of a patio chair, her chest heaving with silent sobs. I looked at the aunts and uncles, who were suddenly very interested in looking anywhere but at me. The hierarchy of this family had just been completely permanently destroyed, and I was the one left holding the crown. Pastor Thomas was the first to break the heavy, suffocating silence. He stepped forward, his Bible clutched tightly against his chest, as if it could physically shield him from the sheer volume of sin that had just been exposed in this suburban backyard. His face was a mask of absolute horror and profound disgust. "You lied to me, Vivian," the pastor said, his voice trembling with righteous indignation. "You brought me to your home under the guise of an intervention for a troubled young woman. You asked me to pray over her soul. You asked me to lay hands on her and cast out the spirit of rebellion. But she is not the one harboring demons. This entire household is built on a foundation of deceit and theft." Vivian reached out a shaking hand toward the clergyman. "Pastor, please," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "It is a misunderstanding. The devil is working through her to destroy our family. We just need to pray." "Do not use the Lord's name to cover up federal crimes," Vivian, the pastor, snapped, slapping her hand away as if her touch would burn him. "I have ministered to this community for 30 years. I wrote glowing character references for Jamal's medical school applications. I stood before the congregation and praised your parenting. You made a fool out of me to protect a thief." I stepped over the shattered pieces of my cell phone and turned my attention directly to Desmond. He was trying to shrink back into the shadows of the patio, but there was nowhere left for him to hide. The blazing 85-inch television screen was still casting a harsh blue light across his sweating, panicked face. "Let us talk about exactly how desperate you were, Desmond," I said, my voice carrying a lethal calm. "You did not just forge my signature on some generic bank document. You went to a predatory private credit lender. You committed wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to secure $50,000 in my name. Why? Because your own credit is completely ruined. You have remortgaged this house 3 times to pay for Vivian's country club memberships and Jamal's tuition. You do not have a single dime of equity left to your name. Uncle Ray turned sharply to stare at his brother. You remortgaged the estate, he demanded. Desmond, you told me this property was paid off 10 years ago. He lied to you too, Uncle Ray. I said not taking my eyes off my so-called father. He lies to everyone because the appearance of wealth is the only thing keeping this family from turning on each other. But the $50,000 was not just another drop in the bucket of their massive debt. It was a ransom payment. I walked over to Jamal, who was still rocking back and forth on the patio stones. Jamal did not just lose money on an app, I explained to the horrified crowd of family, friends, and relatives. He owes $50,000 to a very specific underground syndicate operating out of the South Side. These are not debt collectors who send you letters in the mail. These are men who show up at your apartment with baseball bats. They gave Jamal a deadline. He had until tomorrow morning to produce the cash, or they were going to break both of his legs and shatter his hands. It is kind of hard to perform surgery with shattered hands, isn't it, Jamal? A collective gasp echoed across the yard. The neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, who had been sipping sweet tea and gossiping with Aunt Shirley just an hour ago, actually dropped her glass. It shattered on the ground, but nobody even looked down. Desmond knew about the debt. I continued raising my voice so every single person on the property could hear the absolute truth. Jamal went crying to his daddy when the loan sharks threatened him. But Desmond was completely broke. He could not borrow another cent. So he looked at the daughter he threw away, the daughter he abandoned, and decided I was nothing but a sacrificial lamb. He stole my social security number to take out a high-interest private loan. He was going to take the 50 grand, pay off the syndicate, to save his precious golden boy's legs, and leave me saddled with a massive fraudulent debt that would have destroyed my fintech career before I even reached 30. Desmond opened his mouth to defend himself, but nothing came out. He looked like a cornered animal, realizing the trap had completely snapped shut. You were going to let them destroy her! Aunt Shirley whispered, her eyes wide with shock. For all her arrogance and snobbery, even Shirley drew the line at feeding a family member to wolves. You were going to let Zuri take the fall for Jamal's gambling debts. He is a medical student. Vivian suddenly shrieked, her voice completely unhinged. She lunged forward, placing herself between me and Jamal, like a deranged mother bear protecting a rabid cub. He is going to be a surgeon. He is going to save lives. He just made a little mistake. He got in over his head. We had to protect his future. Zuri does not have a future like his. She just works with computers. She could bounce back from a little debt. Jamal is special. He is the legacy of this family. The absolute delusion in her words hung in the air, a pathetic testament to her blind obsession with status. She was willing to excuse embezzlement, fraud, and association with violent criminals as long as her son kept wearing a white coat and carrying the family name. He is not a legacy, Vivian, I said, staring into her wild, desperate eyes. He is a felon, and he is not going to be a surgeon. Medical schools tend to frown upon students who embezzle hundreds of thousands of dollars from their fraternity brothers to fund illegal offshore gambling habits. His acceptance is going to be revoked by Monday morning. The SEC is already freezing his accounts. The university will expel him before the week is over. No, Vivian moaned, sinking to her knees beside her son and wrapping her arms around his shaking shoulders. No, you cannot do this. I will not let you ruin him. I did not ruin him, Vivian. He ruined himself. I just brought the receipts. Pastor Thomas shook his head, his expression hardening into pure stone. I cannot be associated with this, he announced loudly. I cannot have the name of my church dragged into a federal investigation for fraud and illegal gambling. Do not ever call me again, Vivian. Do not show your face in my congregation. The pastor turned on his heel and marched toward the side gate. His departure was the signal the rest of the guests needed. The pillars of the community, the wealthy neighbors, the prestigious family friends, they all started moving at once. It was a mass exodus. Nobody wanted to be standing in this backyard when the federal agents inevitably showed up. They scrambled toward the exits, abandoning their plates of expensive food and their half-empty cocktail glasses. Aunt Shirley grabbed her purse and practically dragged her husband toward the driveway without saying another word. Uncle Ray just stared at Desmond, shaking his head in absolute disgust before turning his back on his own brother and walking away. Within minutes, the lavish, extravagant cookout that was supposed to celebrate the superiority of the golden child was completely deserted. The yard was empty except for me, Desmond, Vivian, and Jamal. I looked down at the shattered remains of my cell phone still lying on the patio stones. "You owe me a new phone, Jamal," I said, breaking the heavy silence. "And since you do not have any money left, I suggest you ask Desmond to buy it for you. Although considering I am pressing federal charges against him for identity theft first thing tomorrow morning, he might need to save his cash for a good defense attorney." I turned around and walked toward the gate, leaving them sitting in the ruins of their own making. My hand was on the heavy iron latch of the gate when the sound of frantic, stumbling footsteps echoed behind me. I did not even have time to turn around before a heavy hand closed over my wrist. It was not a violent grip this time. It was a weak, trembling grasp. "Zuri, please wait." I turned to see Desmond dropping to his knees on the manicured grass. His expensive tailored suit jacket was covered in dirt and his tie hung loosely around his neck. The proud, booming patriarch of the family, the man who had spent his entire life looking down his nose at me, was now groveling at my feet. "Please do not leave," he begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, wet wheeze. "You do not understand. You do not know the whole truth about the $50,000. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no sympathy. Just a cold, clinical observation of a man who had finally hit rock bottom. "I know exactly what the $50,000 is for Desmond," I replied, keeping my voice loud enough for the lingering guests and family members in the driveway to hear. "I know Jamal is in bed with an underground syndicate. I know they do not care about his medical school acceptance or your country club membership." Vivian crawled across the patio stones, ignoring the fact that her designer dress was soaking up spilled beer and dirt. She grabbed my ankles, her fake eyelashes smeared across her cheeks in dark, ugly streaks. "They are going to kill him, Zuri," she sobbed hysterically. "They sent pictures to his phone. They sent pictures of our house. They know where we live. They know where he goes to school. The loan Desmond took out in your name was the only way. The private lender was going to wire the cash by midnight tonight. If the syndicate does not get their $50,000 by tomorrow morning, they are going to break his legs. They promised they would shatter his hands so he could never perform surgery. You have to save him." I stared at the woman who had given birth to me. The sheer audacity of her request was breathtaking. "Let me make sure I understand this perfectly, Vivian," I said, stepping back so her hands slipped off my ankles. "Your golden child, your precious legacy, actively chose to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars from his fraternity. He chose to take that stolen money and place illegal bets with violent, organized criminals. He lost everything. And when the criminals came to collect you, and Desmond decided the best course of action was to commit federal identity theft against your own daughter. You wanted me to wake up next month with a $50,000 loan in my name, completely destroying my credit score and my career in the financial sector, just so Jamal would not have to face the consequences of his own degenerate actions. He is your brother?" Desmond pleaded, wiping sweat from his face. "He made a mistake. He is just a boy. He got in over his head. You have the money, Zuri. You work in finance. You can clear the hold on the account. You can authorize the wire transfer right now on that tablet. Please, I will sign the house over to you. I will give you my car. I will do whatever you want." I laughed, a harsh, sharp sound that cut through the humid night air. "You do not own this house, Desmond. The bank owns it. You have remortgaged this property 3 times just to keep up appearances. Your cars are leased. Your credit is completely shot. You have absolutely nothing of value to offer me." I walked back toward the center of the patio, forcing the remaining family, friends, and relatives who were hovering near their cars to witness the complete and utter obliteration of the golden child facade. "Look at him," I commanded, pointing a finger at Jamal, who was still curled in a fetal position on the ground, weeping like an infant. "Take a really good look at the future doctor. This is the man you all told me to emulate. This is the man you compared me to at every single Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner. You called me a failure because I did not go to an Ivy League school. You called me an outcast because I built my wealth quietly instead of flashing it in your faces. I raised the iPad high in the air, the screen still glowing with the raw data of Jamal's financial crimes. Your golden child is a fraud, I announced, my voice ringing with absolute finality. He is a coward who hid behind mommy and daddy when the real world came knocking. He was perfectly happy to let me take the fall for his criminal debts. He was perfectly happy to let me go to federal prison for money laundering so he could keep playing dress-up with Chloe and pretending to be a tech founder. Aunt Shirley, who was standing near the driveway with her hand over her mouth, finally spoke up, her voice barely a whisper. Vivian, how could you let this happen in your own home? How could you let your son get involved with a syndicate? Because she cares more about the illusion of success than actual character, I answered for her. Vivian would rather have a felon for a son than admit she raised a failure. Zuri, I am begging you, Jamal whimpered finally, lifting his bruised, tear-stained face from the concrete. Please do not let them hurt me. You have the power to stop the hold. You can release the funds. I will pay you back every single cent. I will drop out of medical school and get a job. I will do anything. You are right, Jamal, I said, looking down at him with cold, calculating eyes. I do have the power to release the funds. With one tap on this screen, I could authorize the private lender to disperse the $50,000. I could save your legs. I could save your parents from the loan sharks. Jamal's eyes lit up with a pathetic, desperate hope. He reached a trembling hand toward me. Please, Zuri, please. But if I authorize that transfer, I continued, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper, I become an accessory to wire fraud. I become complicit in funding an illegal gambling syndicate. I risk my entire company, my federal security clearance, and my freedom. And for what? For a family that treated me like dirt on their shoes until the exact moment they needed me to be their human shield. I looked at Desmond, who was still kneeling in the dirt. I looked at Vivian, who was sobbing uncontrollably. And finally, I looked at Jamal. You dug this grave, Jamal, I said, stepping over his outstretched hand. Now it is time for you to lie in it. The utter destruction of their meticulously crafted reality hung heavy in the humid evening air. For a long, painful minute, nobody moved. The only sound was Jamal's pathetic wet gasps as he rocked back and forth on the patio stones, mourning the loss of his wealthy fiancée and his fabricated future. Then the shock finally wore off, and the raw animal panic set in. Desmond let out a guttural sound that was half roar and half sob. He pushed himself off the ground, his expensive suit ruined his face purple with a sudden explosive rage. He could not process the fact that a daughter he had deemed worthless had just single-handedly dismantled his entire empire. He needed a scapegoat. He needed someone to blame for the catastrophic collapse of his life. His wild, bloodshot eyes locked onto the silver iPad in my hands. "Give me that, you little bitch!" he bellowed, launching his heavy frame across the patio. He lunged at me with his thick hands outstretched, intending to rip the device from my grip and smash it into the pavement, just like Jamal had done to my phone. But I was not the terrified little girl he used to bully. I did not flinch. I did not cower. I simply took one smooth, calculated step to the right. Desmond's momentum carried him forward. He grasped at empty air, his heavy leather shoes slipping on the wet grass at the edge of the patio. He stumbled wildly, his arms flailing before he crashed hard into the side of the long catering table. Trays of expensive, untouched food clattered to the ground, sending glazed ribs, baked beans, and crystal serving bowls scattering across the lawn. He scrambled to his feet, wiping barbecue sauce from his ruined jacket, his chest heaving with exertion and sheer terror. "You hacked him!" Desmond screamed, pointing a trembling, thick finger at my face. "You are a criminal hacker. You broke into federal servers and manipulated the data to make your brother look bad. You fabricated every single piece of information on that screen because you are jealous of his success. I am calling the police right now. I am having you arrested for cybercrimes. I will see you locked in a federal penitentiary for the rest of your miserable life." I looked at him with a mixture of dark amusement and profound pity. The man was drowning in his own delusions, clutching at straws that did not even exist. You truly have no idea how the modern world works. Do you, Desmond? I asked, my voice echoing clearly across the ruined backyard. I did not hack anything. I am a licensed financial investigator running a regulated fintech platform. That data on the screen is pulled directly from public SEC filings and open police blotters. It is a live feed from the Federal Banking Commission. I did not write those numbers. Jamal generated them every single time he wired stolen frat money to an illegal bookie in Costa Rica. I just brought them to the light. He is lying, Vivian wailed, scrambling to her feet and gripping Desmond's arm. Desmond, tell them she is lying. Tell them Jamal is a good boy. He is going to be a doctor. She is trying to destroy us because she has always been a bitter, jealous mistake. I turned my gaze to Vivian, letting the ice in my eyes freeze the frantic denials right in her throat. You thought you could build an empire on a foundation of lies, Vivian. You thought you could spend decades telling me I was worthless while elevating a thief to the status of a god. You thought you could sacrifice my future, my credit and my freedom just to keep playing pretend at the country club. And now you are standing in the wreckage of your own choices. Desmond took another step toward me, his fists clenched at his sides. He was trying to summon the old booming authority that used to make me cower in my childhood bedroom. You are going to fix this, Zuri, he ordered, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. You are going to get on that tablet, and you are going to clear the hold on the private loan. You are going to let that $50,000 process into my account. And then you are going to write a formal statement to the police, saying you made a mistake about Jamal's finances. You will take the blame. You will say your software had a glitch. The sheer unadulterated entitlement was almost fascinating to witness. Even now, completely cornered and exposed, he still believed he could order me to fall on my sword for his benefit. He still believed his booming voice carried the power of a king. Are you genuinely deaf or just completely incapable of processing reality? I asked, tilting my head and studying him like a biological specimen. I am not clearing the loan, Desmond. I am reporting the forged signature to the authorities the second I leave this property. You committed wire fraud. You committed identity theft. The penalty for defrauding a financial institution is up to 20 years in federal prison. And you want me to write a letter saying my software had a glitch. I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. Desmond actually shrank back, his bravado melting away under the weight of his own impending doom. You are not going to call the police on me, Desmond. I continued, my voice low and dangerous. You are not going to report me for cybercrimes. You are going to stand right there and pray that the underground syndicate Jamal owes money to decides to be merciful when they show up tomorrow morning to collect their $50,000. Because I'm not giving you a single dime. I am not saving your house. I am not saving Jamal's legs. I am walking out of that gate, and I am leaving you all exactly where you belong. In the dirt. Jamal let out another loud, wailing sob, clutching his head and rocking on the ground. Vivian sank to her knees beside him, weeping hysterically and pulling at her expensive hair. Desmond just stood there, breathing heavily, staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. He finally realized that the stray dog he had kicked around his entire life had just closed its jaws around his throat, and I was not going to let go. I had barely taken 3 steps toward the heavy iron gate when a piercing, hysterical scream shattered the humid night air. It was not Vivian this time. It was Chloe. The polished, perfectly manicured heiress who had spent the entire afternoon sipping champagne and looking down her nose at my family had completely snapped. The realization that she was not marrying a brilliant, wealthy medical prodigy, but rather a broke, fraudulent gambling addict, had finally short-circuited her brain. Her carefully crafted aesthetic of quiet luxury and old-money grace evaporated in an instant. She stormed across the patio, her designer heels clicking frantically against the stone, and positioned herself directly over Jamal. He was still curled on the ground, whimpering into his hands, but Chloe showed zero mercy. She kicked him hard in the ribs with the pointed toe of her shoe, causing him to yelp in pain. "Get up, you pathetic broke loser!" Chloe shrieked, her voice entirely stripped of its usual refined melody. It was harsh, ugly, and utterly unhinged. You lied to me. You let me parade you around my father's country club. You let me tell the partners at his law firm that you were launching a revolutionary medical startup. You made me look like an absolute idiot. Jamal scrambled backward, clutching his side, his face pale and slick with tears. Chloe, baby. Please, he begged, his voice cracking. I can fix this. I swear I can win the money back. Just give me another chance. I love you. You love my father's connections, Chloe spat, kicking at him again. You love the trust fund you thought you were marrying into. You are nothing but a common thief stealing from frat boys and blowing it on offshore betting. Do you have any idea how much money I spent on our engagement party? Do you know how much my family paid for the wedding deposits? And you bought me fake designer bags from China. To prove her point, she grabbed the counterfeit Birkin bag she had discarded earlier and launched it directly at Jamal's face. The heavy metal clasp caught him squarely on the cheekbone, leaving an instant, angry red welt. Vivian shrieked and tried to intervene, grabbing Chloe's arm, but the younger woman shoved my mother away with surprising force, sending Vivian tumbling back into the dirt. Do not touch me, you delusional enabler, Chloe screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Vivian. You knew he was a fraud. You raised a criminal. You are all a bunch of pathetic, desperate con artists playing dress-up. The sheer vitriol in her voice was staggering. Chloe had completely dropped her polite high society mask, revealing the spoiled, vicious child underneath. She stomped her feet, her face flushed, her perfect blowout now a tangled mess around her shoulders. It was a full-blown toddler tantrum executed by a grown woman in a ruined designer dress. Then her wild, furious eyes locked onto me. I was standing near the gate, my posture relaxed, holding the silver iPad that had brought her entire world crashing down. I was not intimidated by her meltdown. I was bored by it. And you, Chloe sneered, marching toward me with her fists clenched. You think you are so smart, do you not? You think you can just march in here with your stolen financial records and ruin my life? I did not ruin your life, Chloe, I replied, my voice calm and completely devoid of emotion. I saved you from marrying a felon. You should be writing me a thank you note. I am going to destroy you, she hissed, stopping mere inches from my face. You are nothing but a bitter, jealous nobody. You could not stand seeing Jamal succeed, so you fabricated all of this data to tear him down. You are just a jealous little hacker who wants to drag everyone down to your pathetic level. I did not fabricate anything, I said smoothly, stepping around her. And if you had half the intelligence you pretend to have, you would look at the federal wire transfer logs on this screen and realize your fiancé is going to federal prison by the end of the week. Now, if you will excuse me, I have actual businesses to run. I reached for the iron latch of the gate, but Chloe was not finished. Desperation and sheer malicious entitlement took over. She could not handle the fact that I, a woman she considered entirely beneath her class and status, held all the power. She needed to reassert her dominance. She needed to put me in my place. You are not going anywhere, Chloe stated, her voice dropping into a deadly vindictive register. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her smartphone. Her manicured thumb tapped aggressively against the screen. You think you can commit cybercrimes against my fiancé and just walk away? You clearly do not know who my family is. My father is a senior partner at the most ruthless corporate law firm in the state. He eats amateur hackers like you for breakfast. She pressed the call button and immediately tapped the speakerphone icon, holding the device up for the entire yard to hear. The phone rang once, twice. Then a deep, gravelly voice echoed through the speaker. Chloe, it is late. Is everything all right? Daddy. Chloe wailed instantly, shifting her tone from vicious rage to a manufactured, helpless whimper. Her ability to play the victim on command was almost impressive. Daddy, I need you right now. It is an absolute emergency. What is wrong, sweetheart? The man's voice hardened instantly, shifting into pure protective aggression. Are you safe? Where are you? I am at Jamal's parents' house and everything is ruined, Chloe cried, forcing a fake sob into the microphone. There is a ghetto hacker bitch named Zuri here. She is Jamal's sister and she is a complete psychopath. She broke into federal banking servers and altered all of Jamal's financial records. She is ruining his life and she is threatening me, Daddy. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, the heavy, imposing silence of a powerful man preparing to go to war. She stole my social security number, Chloe continued, layering the lies with expert precision. She hacked into banks and she is committing massive wire fraud. Daddy, you have to do something. Have her thrown in federal prison immediately. Call the FBI. Call the police. I want her locked up tonight. Chloe lowered the phone slightly and looked directly at me. A slow, triumphant smirk spread across her tear-stained face. She genuinely believed she had won. She believed that her father's money, his connections, and his sheer corporate power would crush me like an insect. She thought she had just handed down my death sentence. "Stay right there, Chloe!" The deep voice boomed through the speaker, radiating absolute authority. "Do not let that woman out of your sight. I am making calls right now. I will have the authorities at that house in 10 minutes. Nobody threatens my daughter. Nobody." The line clicked dead. Chloe crossed her arms over her chest, looking at me with pure, unadulterated venom. "You are done," she whispered, her smirk widening into a cruel smile. "My father is going to ruin you. You are going to spend the next 20 years in a federal cell." Chloe held the glowing smartphone in front of her like a loaded weapon. Her chest heaved with triumphant, vindictive breaths. She stared at me with wide, manic eyes, absolutely convinced that she had just initiated my total destruction. In her privileged, sheltered mind, one phone call to her daddy was all it took to erase anyone who dared to inconvenience her. "Give me the exact spelling of her name." The deep, gravelly voice of her father barked through the speakerphone. His tone was sharp and ruthless, the sound of a corporate shark preparing to dismember a target. "I want her full legal name, Chloe. I want the name of her shell company and the LLC she is hiding behind. I am opening a line to the regional director of the FBI right now. We will have her digital footprint frozen before she even leaves that driveway. Spell it out for me." Chloe smirked, tossing a triumphant sneer over her shoulder at Jamal, who was still sobbing into his hands. "Did you hear that, you pathetic little fraud?" she spat. "My father is going to obliterate your sister." She turned back to me, raising the phone higher so the microphone was pointed directly at my face. "Go ahead, ghetto hacker," she taunted. "Tell my father your name so he can carve it onto your federal prison cell." I did not blink. I did not step back. Instead, I closed the distance between us with slow, deliberate strides. Chloe instinctively tried to pull the phone back, a flash of sudden hesitation crossing her face, but she held her ground. I leaned in close enough to smell the stale champagne and panic radiating off her skin. I directed my voice straight into the microphone of her phone, keeping my tone as cold and clear as cut glass. "My name is Zuri Sterling," I stated, articulating every single syllable with absolute authority. "Founder and Chief Executive Officer of Aegis Financial Systems. That is spelled A-E-G-I-S. I believe we met last quarter at the Global Compliance Summit in Geneva." The audio connection remained open, but the sound pouring out of the speakerphone abruptly ceased. The background noise of typing keyboards and shuffling papers in Richard's distant office vanished, entirely replaced by a suffocating heavy static. It was the terrifying, absolute stillness of a massive predatory animal realizing it had just stepped on a landmine. The silence radiated outward from the phone, settling over the ruined suburban backyard like a thick winter fog. Desmond and Vivian, who had been scrambling in the dirt to comfort a weeping Jamal, froze in place like statues. The few remaining guests who had lingered near the heavy iron gate to watch the spectacle held their collective breath. The faint mechanical hum of the pool filter and the distant chirp of evening crickets were the only sounds daring to break the tension. 10 seconds passed. 15. The heavy, humid air felt impossible to breathe. "Daddy," Chloe asked, her voice losing a significant fraction of its arrogant, razor-sharp edge. She tapped the screen of her phone, her perfectly manicured fingernail clicking nervously against the glass. "Daddy, are you still there? Did you get the spelling? You need to call the regional director right now." When the voice finally came back through the speaker, it was completely unrecognizable. The booming, ruthless corporate shark who had just promised to devour me whole had vanished into thin air. In its place was a fragile, trembling whisper. It was the sound of a very powerful, very wealthy man who had just looked at his financial monitors and realized his entire empire was hanging by a single fraying thread. Chloe. Her father rasped the syllables, shaking with barely contained panic. Chloe, please tell me you are joking. Please tell me you did not just disrespect Ms. Sterling. The atmosphere in the yard shifted with the force of a physical blow. The hostility and entitled arrogance that had been fueling Chloe just seconds ago instantly evaporated, replaced by sheer, profound confusion. Her brow furrowed and her mouth dropped open in an unattractive, slack-jawed stare. "What are you talking about, Daddy?" she demanded, a high-pitched, petulant whine creeping back into her voice. "She is a criminal. She is Jamal's broke sister. She hacked into his bank accounts and ruined my wedding. I told you to call the FBI and have her arrested. You spoiled, ignorant idiot." Her father exploded, the sheer volume of his sudden terror cracking the phone's small speaker. "Shut your mouth! Shut your mouth right now before you bankrupt this entire family." Chloe physically flinched, almost dropping the device onto the patio stones. She stared at the phone as if it had suddenly transformed into a venomous snake. Aunt Shirley, who was still hovering near the driveway, let out a soft gasp. "Do you have any idea who you are talking to?" Richard bellowed, his voice entirely stripped of its polished country club composure. Aegis Financial Systems does not just handle our encrypted escrow accounts. They do not just manage our compliance. Ms. Sterling executed a corporate buyout last quarter. Her conglomerate acquired a 70% controlling stake in our law firm. She is the majority shareholder, Chloe. She is the board of directors. She owns the building I am sitting in right now. She signs my paychecks. She is literally my boss. The color drained from Chloe's perfectly contoured face in a rushing wave. She looked like all the blood in her body had suddenly pooled in her expensive designer heels. She slowly lifted her eyes from the phone and stared at me in absolute, unadulterated horror. The realization hit her with devastating, undeniable force. I was not a bitter, jealous nobody. I was not a blue-collar outcast wearing thrift store clothes. I was a self-made multi-millionaire CEO. I was the financial titan holding the keys to her family's generational wealth. "But look at her," Chloe stammered weakly, her reality completely fracturing. "She is wearing cheap linen. She drove here in a rented car. I do not care if she is wearing a garbage bag." Richard screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "She possesses enough liquid capital to buy and sell our entire bloodline before lunch." "Ms. Sterling." Her father pivoted, his tone instantly shifting from a frantic scream to desperate, pathetic groveling. The pivot was so extreme it gave everyone whiplash. "Ms. Sterling, please. I am begging you. Accept my deepest and most profound apologies. My daughter is overwrought. She is highly emotional from a cancelled wedding. She is a foolish child speaking entirely out of turn and does not represent me or my partners. Please tell me you are not going to liquidate our firm over a personal misunderstanding." I looked at Chloe, who was now shaking visibly, her entire body trembling inside her ruined designer dress. "Your daughter just called me a ghetto hacker bitch and threatened me with a federal prison sentence, Richard," I replied, my voice carrying cleanly and coldly across the silent patio. "She also just threw a counterfeit luxury handbag at the head of a man who currently owes $50,000 to a violent underground gambling syndicate." A sharp, terrified gasp echoed through the phone. "I highly suggest you send a private car to retrieve your daughter immediately, Richard." I continued, my tone entirely devoid of pity or warmth. "Because the loan sharks are going to be arriving at this exact address tomorrow morning to collect their debt. And I would hate for your prestigious firm's reputation to be tied to a violent, bloody collection dispute in the suburbs. I am sending a private security extraction team right now." Richard panicked, his voice a frantic blur of action. "Chloe, do not say another word to that woman. Do not even breathe in her direction. You stand by the gate and wait for the armored car. Do you hear me?" Chloe could not even manage a verbal response. Her fingers went limp and the phone clattered onto the patio stones, the glass screen cracking upon impact. She stumbled backward, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with total defeat. The powerful, untouchable heiress had been entirely dismantled, reduced to a terrified child waiting to be rescued by her daddy's security team. Desmond and Vivian remained frozen on the ground next to Jamal. They had just listened to a billionaire corporate lawyer, a man they considered the absolute peak of high society, a man they had practically worshipped all afternoon, beg for mercy at my feet. The daughter they had thrown away, the child they had relentlessly mocked and hidden in the shadows, was the one holding the crown. They had sacrificed their entire lives, their home, and their credit for a broke gambling addict criminal while actively destroying their relationship with a literal kingmaker. The cracked screen of Chloe's discarded phone flickered on the patio stones. The audio connection was still live. The silence from the speaker was suddenly broken by a harsh, ragged breath from Richard. When he spoke again, his voice was no longer a frantic plea to me. It was a cold, absolute directive aimed squarely at his daughter. "Chloe, listen to me very carefully," Richard commanded, the metallic distortion of the broken speaker making him sound almost mechanical. "You are going to apologize to Ms. Sterling. You are going to do it right now, and you are going to do it on your knees." Chloe gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. She stared at the phone on the ground and then up at me. Her perfectly manicured world was collapsing in real time. She had never been denied anything in her entire life. She had never faced a consequence she could not buy her way out of. The very concept of submission was entirely foreign to her biology. "Daddy, no!" she whimpered, shaking her head frantically. Her voice was thin and reedy, stripped of all its former venom. "You cannot make me do that. People are watching. Jamal's parents are right here." "I do not care if the entire city of Chicago is watching," Richard roared, the sheer volume vibrating against the concrete. "You will drop to your knees and beg that woman for forgiveness, or I will freeze your trust fund before the hour is up. I will cut up your credit cards. I will repossess your car. I will personally pack your designer clothes into trash bags and leave them on the curb. You will have nothing, Chloe. You will be nothing. Get on your knees." The threat was absolute. It was the only language Chloe truly understood. The power of capital. The terror of poverty. She looked at me, her chest heaving, her mascara running in dark, jagged streaks down her cheeks. The arrogance that had defined her existence just 5 minutes ago was completely extinguished. She was utterly dismantled. Stripped of her privileged armor, she was just a terrified girl realizing she had picked a fight with a predator she could not even comprehend. Slowly, agonizingly, Chloe sank down. Her expensive silk dress bunched and folded as her knees made contact with the hard, cold patio stones. The physical descent was a devastating blow to her ego. She kept her head bowed, unable to meet my gaze, her shoulders shaking with heavy, uncontrollable sobs. "Say it," Richard ordered through the phone. "I am sorry," Chloe whispered, the words catching in her throat. Louder, her father demanded. "I am so sorry, Ms. Sterling." Chloe sobbed loudly, the tears dripping off her chin and splattering onto the stone. "I am sorry for what I said. I am sorry for disrespecting you. Please forgive me. Please do not punish my father's firm. I did not know who you were. I am so sorry." I stared down at her, studying the top of her ruined blowout. I felt no triumph in this moment. I felt no joy in watching another woman humiliate herself. It was simply a necessary recalibration of the universe, a firm correction of a system that had allowed her and my family to operate without accountability for far too long. "Your apology is noted, Chloe," I stated, my voice level and calm. "You may stand up now." She scrambled to her feet, her legs trembling so violently she nearly collapsed again. She wiped at her ruined face, smearing black makeup across her cheeks. She was breathing in harsh, jagged gasps, hyperventilating as the adrenaline and terror crashed through her system. Then she slowly turned her head and looked at Jamal. He was still sitting in the dirt, clutching his bruised cheek, his eyes wide with a mixture of hope and utter despair. He was waiting for her to say something comforting. He was waiting for his wealthy savior to gather him up and take him away from the wreckage of his own lies. He still somehow believed that the illusion could be salvaged. Chloe's expression hardened into a mask of pure, unfiltered loathing. All the rage and humiliation she had just suffered was instantly redirected at the man who had brought her into this miserable situation. "You did this to me," she hissed, her voice shaking with raw hatred. "You brought me to this disgusting house. You lied to me about your money. You lied to me about your sister. You made me humiliate myself in front of my father. You are a disease, Jamal." "Chloe, please," Jamal begged, reaching a trembling hand out toward her. "We can get past this. I love you. Do not ever speak to me again," she screamed, stepping back as if his proximity might infect her. She grabbed her left hand and yanked at the heavy diamond ring on her ring finger. The diamond Jamal had purchased using stolen funds, the diamond that represented his ultimate ticket into high society. It stuck for a second over her knuckle, but she pulled with vicious, frantic force until it slid free. She reared back and threw it directly at him. The heavy platinum band struck Jamal squarely in the center of his chest with a dull thud before bouncing off his shirt and rolling away into the wet grass. The engagement was over. The illusion was dead. The structural foundation of Jamal's fabricated life had just been entirely eradicated. Chloe did not say another word. She turned on her heel and ran. She did not bother to pick up her broken phone or her counterfeit Birkin bag. She sprinted across the ruined patio, her heels slipping on the wet stone, shoving the heavy iron gate open with both hands. She disappeared into the dark street, running blindly toward the flashing headlights of the black security SUV that had just pulled up to the curb. The heavy gate swung shut behind her with a loud, final metallic clang. The sound echoed across the yard, sealing Jamal's fate. He was completely abandoned. The wealthy bride who was supposed to pay off his gambling debts was gone. The prestigious law firm connections were gone. The luxury apartment, the imported cars, the high society status, it had all vanished into the night air, leaving behind nothing but a mountain of federal wire fraud and a violent debt collection that was coming due in a matter of hours. Jamal stared at the empty space where Chloe had just been standing. He let out a low, agonizing wail, rocking back and forth in the dirt. He wrapped his arms around his knees, pulling himself into a tight fetal position. The golden child was finally completely alone. Desmond and Vivian stood paralyzed by the catering table, entirely unable to process the total destruction of their son. They had spent decades building a pedestal for a king, only to watch it crumble into dust in a single evening. And they knew with absolute certainty that I was not going to help them clean up the mess. The heavy iron gate clicked shut. The sound echoed across the ruined patio, like a judge's gavel falling in an empty courtroom. For a long moment, nobody moved. The humid night air was thick with the smell of spilled barbecue sauce, expensive cologne, and sheer, unadulterated panic. Jamal remained curled in the dirt, clutching his bruised cheek and weeping with the wet, gasping sounds of a terrified child. Vivian finally broke the silence, letting out a low, guttural moan. She crawled across the wet grass, her silk dress staining with mud, and wrapped her arms protectively around her ruined golden boy. She rocked him back and forth, whispering frantic, pointless reassurances into his hair. Desmond did not move to comfort his son. He did not move to help his wife. He stood perfectly still by the edge of the overturned catering table, staring at the spot where Chloe had just disappeared. His breathing grew loud. It was a harsh, ragged sound, tearing through his nasal passages like a cornered animal. I watched his face transform in the dim patio lighting. The initial shock was fading. The terrifying reality of their situation was crashing down on him with the weight of a collapsing building. $50,000. $50,000 stood between his son and shattered kneecaps. $50,000 stood between his family and total destruction. $50,000 was coming due tomorrow morning. He was a man who had built his entire existence on control. Control over his wife, control over his daughter, control over the narrative. And now he had no control. He had no control over Chloe. He had no control over the truth. He had no control over the violent men coming for his son. Desmond's face flushed a deep, dangerous purple. The veins in his thick neck bulged against his damp collar. He looked at Jamal whimpering in the dirt. He looked at Vivian crying over him. Then his wild, bloodshot eyes snapped directly to me. In his fractured, desperate mind, I was the enemy. It was always my fault. If it rained, it was my fault. If Jamal failed, it was my fault. If the empire crumbled, it was my fault. He could not accept that his son was a criminal. He could not accept that he was a fraud. He needed a scapegoat. He needed a victim. His massive frame began to shake. The polished, booming patriarch was gone completely, replaced by a feral, cornered beast operating on pure, blind survival instinct. He let out a sudden, explosive roar, sweeping his heavy arm across the remains of the catering table. Crystal serving bowls shattered against the stone. Silver platters clattered into the bushes. He lunged toward the far end of the patio where a leather binder sat undisturbed on a small wrought iron side table. It was the binder Vivian had brought out earlier, the binder containing the fraudulent loan documents. Desmond ripped the binder open with such force that the metal rings snapped. He pulled out the thick stack of paper, brandishing it in the air like a weapon. His chest heaved, his eyes wide and manic as he stomped back toward me. "You think you won?" Desmond bellowed, spit flying from his lips. "You think because you wear expensive suits and own some fancy company that you can just walk in here and destroy my family? You think you are untouchable." He shook the papers directly in my face, the crisp white pages fluttering violently in the night air. "I do not care who you are, Zuri," he screamed, his voice cracking with unhinged desperation. "I do not care how rich you are. I do not care what your title is. I still have this." He tapped a thick, trembling finger against the signature line on the bottom page. My forged signature stared back at him. "You still owe this private lender $50,000, he yelled, stepping so close I could feel the heat radiating off his panicked body. "Your name is on this contract. Not Jamal's, not mine, yours. And these men do not care about your federal clearances. They do not care about your corporate clients. They only care about their money." He was completely delusional. The sheer terror of the impending collection had severed his final ties to reality. He genuinely believed that a piece of paper signed with a forged name could magically transfer the physical danger from his son to me. "You have deep pockets, Zuri," Desmond snarled, a sickening, triumphant gleam flashing in his wild eyes. "You just admitted you have millions. So they will go after you. They will garnish your wages. They will sue you into the ground. They will show up at your fancy corporate headquarters, and they will take every single dime you have." He thrust the contract toward my chest, trying to physically force the burden onto me. "You are paying for my son," Desmond roared, the sound tearing from his throat. "You are going to clear this debt. You are going to save this family because your name is on this paper and you have no other choice. You are paying for my son." I looked at the crumpled forged document trembling in his thick, sweaty hand. Then I looked up into his frantic, desperate eyes. He was a drowning man, entirely convinced that if he just held my head under the water, he might finally learn how to float. I did not blink. I did not flinch or shrink back from his imposing figure. I simply raised my right hand and smoothly plucked the crumpled document from his sweaty, trembling grip. Desmond let out a sharp breath, his chest puffing out as if he had just delivered a fatal blow. He stood taller, trying to reclaim the patriarchal authority that had been stripped from him over the last hour. "You see it now," he sneered, his voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "You see your name right there on the dotted line. Those private lenders are ruthless, Zuri. They do not send polite letters. They send men with baseball bats. They freeze accounts. And now they are coming for you. You have to wire that $50,000 tonight or your precious little empire is going to burn right alongside us." I did not respond to his frantic gloating. I slowly smoothed out the creases in the thick parchment paper. The patio lights cast a harsh glow over the bold black ink. My eyes traced the sloppy imitation of my signature at the bottom of the page. It was a pathetic forgery, a desperate scrawl born of panic and greed. But my attention did not linger on the signature. My gaze shifted upward to the bold letterhead stamped across the top of the contract. "Apex Premier Lending." I read aloud, my voice cutting through the humid night air with absolute clarity. "A boutique, high-risk credit firm operating primarily out of the greater Chicago area. Known for exorbitant interest rates, aggressive collection tactics, and a clientele consisting almost entirely of degenerate gamblers and desperate addicts. Desmond crossed his heavy arms over his chest, a smug, ugly grin twisting his features. "That is right," he barked. "And they hold your debt now. So you better get out your checkbook and pay for your brother before they show up at your corporate lobby and embarrass you in front of your billionaire clients." I lowered the paper. I looked at Desmond's sweaty, triumphant face. I looked at Vivian, who was still kneeling in the dirt clutching Jamal. And then I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was not a smile of concession or defeat. It was a slow, terrifyingly calm smile that caused the smug satisfaction on Desmond's face to instantly curdle into confusion. It was the smile of an apex predator looking down at a mouse that had just eagerly leaped into a trap. "What are you smiling at?" Desmond demanded, his voice losing a fraction of its booming volume. He took a tiny involuntary step backward. "This is a legally binding contract. You are on the hook for $50,000. You really have absolutely zero comprehension of what my company actually does, Desmond," I said, my tone conversational, almost light. "You see, Aegis Financial Systems is not just an auditing firm. We are a massive conglomerate. We provide security protocols for federal banks, yes, but our primary mechanism for exponential growth involves acquiring distressed assets." Desmond blinked, his thick brow furrowing. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a single manicured finger, commanding his total silence. When high-risk lending firms overextend themselves or face federal scrutiny, they become desperate to liquidate their portfolios, I explained, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. They sell their toxic debt for pennies on the dollar. My company buys those firms. We sanitize their ledgers. We restructure their assets. We absorb their entire operational infrastructure. The color was slowly draining from Desmond's face. He was not a smart man, but he possessed enough animal cunning to recognize the sound of an approaching train. His eyes darted from my face to the contract in my hand. Yesterday morning at exactly 9 o'clock, I sat in a glass boardroom in downtown Chicago. I continued, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register. I signed a $70 million acquisition deal. Aegis Financial Systems purchased 4 distinct high-risk credit firms operating in the Midwest. We bought their buildings. We bought their servers. We bought every single outstanding debt they held. I tapped the bold letterhead on the contract with my index finger. The sharp sound echoed like a gunshot. "One of those firms was Apex Premier Lending," I stated, watching the absolute destruction dawn in his eyes. "I own them, Desmond. I own their ledgers. I own their collections department. I am the private lender." Desmond's mouth fell open. He let out a strange, wheezing gasp, clutching at his chest, as if his heart had suddenly stopped beating. Vivian let out a muffled shriek, scrambling backward on the grass. "You did not borrow money from anonymous loan sharks who are going to come after me," I said, stepping so close to him that he had to look down to meet my eyes. "You did not cleverly trap me in your financial mess. You committed federal wire fraud and identity theft against my corporation. You stole $50,000 from a subsidiary of my company, and you just physically handed me the written proof." Desmond staggered backward. His heavy leather shoes tangled against the legs of the overturned catering table, and he crashed down onto a pile of broken serving trays. He did not even try to catch himself. He just lay there among the spilled baked beans and shattered crystals, staring up at me with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. The realization broke him completely. The absolute finality of his mistake crushed whatever remaining bravado he possessed. He had thought he was holding a weapon. He had thought he possessed the ultimate leverage to force me into submission. Instead, he had personally hand-delivered his own signed confession to the exact person holding the power to lock him in a federal penitentiary for the rest of his natural life. I stood over him, holding the forged contract casually at my side. The empire of lies he had built to protect his golden sun was nothing but a smoking crater, and I was the one holding the matches. The silence stretched tight enough to snap. I looked down at Desmond, sprawled among the ruined hors d'oeuvres. He was a portrait of total systemic failure. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The feral beast from a moment ago had been entirely hollowed out, leaving only a pathetic, trembling shell. Vivian finally broke her paralysis. She let go of Jamal and scrambled across the wet patio stones, her expensive silk dress, soaking up the spilled wine and crushed garnishes. She reached Desmond and grabbed his shoulders, shaking him frantically. "Desmond," she shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical frequency. "Desmond, what is she talking about? What did you do? What did you sign?" He could not answer her. He could only stare at my shoes, his chest heaving with shallow, terrified breaths. I reached into my structured leather tote bag. The sharp zip of the gold hardware cut through Vivian's panicked crying. I reached inside and withdrew a thick, heavy manila folder. It was dense with legal parchment packed with the comprehensive financial history of a family that had spent decades living far beyond their means. When I purchased Apex Premier Lending yesterday morning, I did not just purchase their future, I stated, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal authority across the yard. I purchased their past. I purchased every single ledger. I purchased every single debt. I purchased every single secret they kept buried in their digital vaults. I stepped over a shattered crystal serving bowl and dropped the heavy manila folder directly onto Desmond's chest. It hit him with a heavy thud. He flinched as if the paper itself burned him, but he did not touch it. His hands remained flat against the wet stones. Vivian, however, snatched it up. Her hands were shaking violently as she flipped the heavy cardboard cover open. Her eyes darted across the bold legal print the official notary stamps, the red ink warnings of delinquency. "Did you really think I would stop at $50,000, Desmond?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "Did you really think my financial analysts would acquire a high-risk firm and not comb through every single page of their outstanding liabilities?" Vivian let out a sharp, gasping breath. She flipped to the second page, then the third. Her eyes widened in absolute horror as the numbers registered in her brain. Jamal did not just need $50,000 for his wedding. I continued, projecting my voice so Jamal could hear every word from where he sat in the dirt. He needed $20,000 last year to cover his gambling debts. He needed $30,000 the year before to pay off his imported car. He needed $15,000 before that to maintain his luxury apartment downtown. I looked at Jamal, who was now staring at his parents with a look of terrified guilt. "He has been bleeding you dry for years," I said. "And you let him. You paid for his mistakes. You paid for his gambling. You paid for his counterfeit lifestyle. You funded the illusion because you were too cowardly to face the reality of who your son truly is." "That is a lie," Vivian screamed, clutching the folder to her chest. "We paid off those loans. Desmond told me we paid them off. We remortgaged the summer house. We liquidated the stock portfolios. We paid them." "You paid the mainstream banks, Vivian," I corrected her, my tone entirely devoid of pity. "But mainstream banks cut you off. Mainstream banks look at your credit score, and they close the door. So your husband went to the shadow market. He went to Apex Premier Lending. And Apex does not just hand out cash to desperate men. Apex demands security. Apex demands blood." I pointed a single finger at the folder crushed against Vivian's chest. "Read the collateral clause," Vivian, I commanded. "Read what your husband pledged when the cash ran out and your golden boy needed another bailout." Vivian's hands trembled so violently she could barely turn the page. She traced her manicured finger down the dense block of legal text, stopping at the section highlighted in bold black ink. Her lips moved silently as she read the words. Then the color completely drained from her face. She looked like a corpse. "No," she whispered, the document slipping from her fingers and landing in a puddle of spilled wine. "No, Desmond, you did not. Tell me you did not do this." Desmond squeezed his eyes shut, turning his head away from his wife. Tears leaked from his tightly shut eyelids, mixing with the sweat on his face. "He used this house," I stated, delivering the final devastating blow. "He used the primary residence. He used this beautiful, pristine suburban mansion that you used to look down on everyone else. He bypassed the traditional mortgage lenders and put the deed to this property up as collateral for a high-risk subprime private loan to save your criminal son." Vivian let out a guttural, agonizing scream. It was the sound of a woman realizing her entire universe was a mirage. She began hitting Desmond, striking his chest and shoulders with her fists. "You promised me," she shrieked. "You promised me this house was safe. You signed it away. You signed away everything." He signed over the deed. I continued, my voice slicing through her hysteria. He signed over the equity. He signed over the walls. He signed over the roof. He signed over the very ground we are standing on. It was a desperate gamble, and he lost. I stepped back, taking in the complete destruction of the family that had tried to destroy me. "Those loans are not just active," I informed them, the cold reality of the financial market settling over the yard. "They are severely defaulted. You are 7 months behind on the primary payments. The interest has compounded into a terminal financial disease. The grace period expired 3 weeks ago. Apex Premier Lending had already initiated the foreclosure process." Desmond finally opened his eyes, looking up at me with total defeat. "When I bought Apex, I bought their entire portfolio," I said, smiling down at him. A chilling, triumphant smile that I knew would haunt his nightmares for whatever remained of his life. "I bought the active loans. I bought the defaulted loans. I bought the collateral." I slowly gestured to the sprawling house behind them. The expensive patio, the manicured lawn, the glowing swimming pool. "You do not own this patio," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You do not own that iron gate. You do not own the front door. You do not own the kitchen where you mocked my upbringing. You do not own the dining room where you told me I would never be enough. I own it," I stated, articulating every syllable with absolute precision. "I own the mortgage. I own the deed. I own the title. I own the very dirt you are bleeding on." The silence that followed was absolute. The chirping of the crickets and the hum of the pool filter were the only sounds left in the world. Jamal stared at me, his jaw slack, finally understanding the catastrophic magnitude of his actions. He had not just ruined his own life. He had systematically eradicated his parents' entire existence. "You have 72 hours to vacate my property," I told them, turning my back on the wreckage. "I expect the keys on my desk by Monday morning. If you leave so much as a single scratch on my hardwood floors, I will have you arrested for vandalism." I did not wait for a response. I walked across my patio, my heels clicking sharply against the stone, and stepped out through my iron gate, leaving them to drown in the ruins of their own making. I paused at the edge of the heavy iron gate. The humid night air was thick with the scent of their despair, but my business with them was not quite finished. I turned back to face the wreckage of my biological family. They were broken, bleeding, and terrified, but they still needed to understand the absolute finality of this evening. I raised my right hand and snapped my fingers. The sharp, definitive crack cut straight through Vivian's hysterical sobbing and echoed across the silent street. Instantly, the sleek LED headlights of a black Maybach flared to life from where it had been idling silently in the shadows across the road. The heavy armored door swung open with a smooth mechanical hum. My personal security director stepped out onto the asphalt. He was a towering mountain of a man, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit, moving with the terrifying disciplined precision of a military operative. He bypassed the lingering neighborhood gawkers, pushed open the wrought iron gate, and walked directly onto the ruined patio. He did not look at Vivian, who scrambled out of his path with a terrified shriek. He did not look at Jamal, who was curled into a pathetic, trembling ball on the wet grass. He marched straight up to Desmond and extended a crisp, heavy legal envelope. Desmond stared at the pristine white paper as if it were a live explosive. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely grip the thick cardstock. When he finally ripped the seal and pulled out the formal document, the last remaining traces of color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly ashen gray. "It is an official expedited eviction order," I explained, my voice echoing with total authority in the dead silence of the yard. "Signed, sealed, and authorized by a federal judge this afternoon. Standard foreclosure protocols do not apply when the property collateral was secured through documented wire fraud and identity theft. The bank does not need 30 days to remove a criminal from a stolen asset." Desmond's mouth worked wordlessly. He looked from the paper to me, his eyes wide with a pleading, pathetic terror that I had never seen on his face before. The booming, arrogant patriarch had been reduced to a whimpering shell. "You threw me away," I said, stepping closer to him so he could feel the absolute zero temperature in my voice. "You sold me out when I was just 3 years old. You discarded me because I was a girl, because I was not your precious golden heir, because I did not fit into the delusional, arrogant narrative you wanted to build for yourselves to impress your superficial friends. You traded my childhood for his privilege. You sacrificed my future to fund his elaborate lies." I looked down at Jamal crying in the dirt and then back to Desmond's ruined face. "And what did that massive investment yield?" Desmond Fye asked, gesturing to the overturned tables and shattered crystal. "A counterfeit sun, a fraudulent empire, a mountain of toxic debt that is about to send you to federal prison. You threw away the only person in this bloodline who actually possessed the intelligence, the grit, and the ruthlessness to build real generational wealth. And now you have exactly 2 hours to pack whatever fits into a plastic garbage bag before my security team physically drags you off my property." The reaction from the remaining audience was instantaneous. The extended relatives, the aunts and uncles who had spent the entire evening sipping stolen champagne and judging my attire suddenly realized the catastrophic gravity of the situation. The hushed whispers turned into panicked, frantic murmurs. They understood that the money was entirely gone. They understood that federal fraud charges were pending. And they understood that violent loan sharks were arriving by morning to collect a debt that could not be paid. The scramble for the exits began. It was a pathetic, desperate display of self-preservation. Aunts grabbed their designer knockoff purses and rushed for the side gate, actively avoiding eye contact with Vivian. Uncles who had previously boasted about Jamal's fake corporate connections practically ran over each other to reach their parked cars. Within 60 seconds, the judgmental peanut gallery had completely abandoned ship scattering into the night to save themselves from the impending fallout. They fled like rats from a sinking vessel, leaving the false king and queen entirely alone. Vivian realized the audience was gone. The grand illusion was permanently shattered. There was no one left to perform for. She let out a guttural, desperate sob and threw herself forward. She crawled across the wet patio stones, dragging her ruined silk dress through the mud and the spilled food. She reached out and grabbed desperately at the hem of my coat. "Zuri, please," she wept, looking up at me with a face completely distorted by panic and smeared black makeup. "Zuri, my sweet girl, you cannot do this to us. We are your family. I am your mother. You are my beautiful daughter. Please have mercy on us. We have nowhere to go. The loan sharks will kill him. Please, Zuri." I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel invisible and worthless. The woman who had watched me struggle, who had actively mocked my ambitions, who had happily funded her son's fraudulent lifestyle while entirely ignoring my existence. The sudden maternal affection she was trying to fake right now was the most repulsive thing I had witnessed all evening. It was an insult to the very concept of motherhood. I reached down and firmly pried her trembling, muddy fingers off my expensive coat. "I stopped being your daughter a very long time ago, Vivian," I stated, stepping back so she was left kneeling in the empty space, clutching at the cold air. "You do not get to claim me now, just because my bank account holds the answers to your prayers. You bet your entire life on the wrong child. Now you get to live with the consequences of that wager." I turned away from her sobbing form and looked at Jamal. He had not moved from his spot on the grass. He was staring blankly at the driveway, listening to the distant but rapidly approaching wail of police sirens echoing through the quiet suburban streets. Aegis Financial Systems did not just buy his debt. My corporate compliance team had automatically forwarded the undeniable evidence of his wire fraud and embezzlement directly to the federal authorities. He was just sitting there waiting for the handcuffs to lock around his wrists. He knew his life as a free man was permanently over. I walked away towards the open gate, leaving the three of them in the center of the ruined party. The heavy scent of spilled wine and crushed flowers hung in the humid air, serving as a fitting perfume for a dead empire. My security director held the heavy back door of the Maybach open for me. I slid into the plush leather interior, the ambient lighting casting a soft, warm glow over the pristine cabin. The contrast between the silent luxury of my vehicle and the muddy, screaming chaos of the yard was absolute. My assistant, who had been waiting patiently inside, handed me a warm porcelain cup of herbal tea. I took a slow, appreciative sip as the heavy armored door shut with a solid, soundproof thud. Through the dark tinted window, I watched Vivian screaming on her knees on the patio, while Desmond sat paralyzed, clutching his eviction notice. The flashing red and blue lights of the arriving police cruisers began to paint the neighborhood, illuminating the ashes of their toxic world. The window rolled all the way up, sealing away the noise, the drama, and the people who no longer mattered. I leaned back into the soft leather, closed my eyes, and the Maybach glided smoothly into the night, leaving them entirely in the past. The ultimate lesson from this story is that true power is never loud, boastful, or built on the foundation of other people's misery. Desmond and Vivian sacrificed their integrity to maintain an illusion of superiority, ultimately losing everything to the very person they deemed completely worthless. Zuri teaches us that success is the absolute best revenge. By focusing on her own growth, building undeniable financial independence, and refusing to internalize the toxic narrative her family assigned to her, she became entirely untouchable. Arrogance will always lead to destruction, but quiet, calculated resilience will always have the final and absolute word. Have you ever had to quietly build your own success to prove a toxic family member wrong? And how did it feel when they finally saw the truth? Share your story in the comments below.